Three, two, one.
You're not supposed to say too long, man.
You're just supposed to keep it going. All right. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Brenton Lengel. I'm a poet, playwright, author of 7 plays that have been produced in New York City, and also author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which the second issue is just about ready to come out. So I'm really excited about that. And for those of you who've been following my channel, I do a lot with... Oh!
I got mine right here. Signed copy.
That's so cool. I'm glad you got that. Yeah. So for those of you who've been following my channel, I do a lot with politics, specifically radical politics. I do a lot of debates. And, you know, this is going back to my old radio show days in New York when I had Insurrection with Brenton Lengel. I had an interview segment called Creative Destruction or Destructive Creation. And one of the people I had on the show is this gentleman here, BZ Douglas. BZ, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Beezy. My musical nickname was given to me when I started. When I met you, I was on, you know, I'm a, you know, the jack of all trades, like ADD, just model child of. So I started out in theater, and then I've got a career arc of about 20 years in web development, deep inside the corporate branding world, because I was radicalized very late. I spent some time in Occupy Wall Street, you know, when Occupy has happened when we were both living there, and I went down to just, you know, be a witness to that and participate as much as possible. Proposed to my wife there and accidentally went viral, but yeah. And then, you know, it's kind of relevant to what we'll be talking about, but as far as when that happened, I didn't want to appear like this clout chasing, like pop in, like, thanks for the beautiful proposal video and, you know, the viral whatever bullshit.
Please donate to my GoFundMe.
Good luck, guys. I'm going to, you know,
Yeah.
now I'll raise a GoFundMe for my honeymoon. No, it galvanized me into the movement more, and I got a little bit of opportunity to speak to press, and I just really tried to make it about, like, this is the changes I want to see, and... So that I just bring that up because now I'm kind of covering people who are getting in front of these things and don't seem to be in it for some of the right reasons or going about it the right way. But
absolutely. So BZ, you know, BZ is a musician. He's incredibly talented. He's an artist.
You can probably sum it up
Yeah.
faster than me. Yeah.
Podcast host of BZ Listening, and also he is a journalist. And you just had a piece published in the Cleveland, what's the specific paper's name?
Cleveland Scene.
The Cleveland Scene.
Yeah, it's one of the major alts around.
I kept wanting to call it the Cleveland Steam in my head, and I knew that wasn't right.
That's a whole other magazine.
So the Cleveland Scene, and this has to do with fake Black Lives Matter, fake activists.
Well,
I mean, how do you want to...
Yeah, I don't know what it is, and I'll tell you, I worked closely with a lot of journalists on this, who mentored me and like sherped me into like getting published for the first time. I had occupied the role of a journalist briefly in like New York during the primary problems that we had.
I remember you were following Bernie Sanders getting squeezed out.
Yeah, all the machinations of the Democratic Party, the state party, and just finding out how broken it was in a deliberate sense. And it was sort of like it wasn't the sort of story where at a certain point you realize you're like, oh, we might be able to turn things around or decertify. At a certain point, you're like, okay, we're just performing an autopsy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the same thing happened. I've got friends in other states who've like moved, and they registered to vote like months ago. So they changed their address, not their registration. And, you know, Democrats, lifelong Democrats, and they are on the progressive end, and they have found that they are unable to vote in their state's primaries because, like, they didn't do it before the first of the year. They like waited until like February to re-register. It's insane how anti-democratic the process really is. But let's not get off on that tangent because we'll talk about that all night. This is specifically about you know, what's
right.
News
so
right
yeah, bringing it back to that, like what basically happened, like the quickest way I've been able to boil this.
First off, what's the title of the article so people can look it up, and I'll also link it in the description.
Yeah, it is the Unauthorized Tamir Rice Memorial is just the latest example of event organizers. Basically, they're happening without this event organizers with that they're organized without the support of Samira Rice or Black Lives Matter Cleveland. And why that matters is, and there's things that actually to talk about the story. There's things I can talk about that didn't make it into the story that I can speak to on sort of this a vague sense, but are important to the story. But on a certain level, it was I don't know exactly what I'm looking at here, but it was something that I felt needed to be called out. So what it was is there was a comment thread on a Reddit post I was reading, and I'm just keeping that vague because there's actually other stories like this I'm tracking down, but I'm trying to not, I don't know if I'm going to let people know where my sources are right now. But so I followed this Reddit post that just said this event was going on, this Tamir Rice Memorial was going on at the same time as a Justice for Desmond Franklin rally and pointed action downtown organized by Black Lives Matter Cleveland. And then at the Tamir Rice one, it was, the event description was like tug of war and like a family reunion type thing and sort of a celebration. And then there were going to be some speakers there, and
yeah.
But
now to interrupt you, just in case people are not familiar, because it was a couple years ago.
with the Tamir Rice case,
Yeah. Can you just give the quick rundown on that?
Well, he was murdered in a park because he was playing with a gun, and the police showed up and just reacted immediately because he was black, and so
And this was a toy gun.
I'm totally sorry. It was, that's a big detail to leave out, isn't it? No, but it's
So he was a kid, and he was killed. How old was he when he died? It was like 12 or 14.
Yeah, he was 12, and
12.
And Samaria Rice, and this is where this comes into where just it started to set off like something to confirm was on the post for this event. Brandon Patterson, who's the organizer, and I'm looking right now because I'm curious. I've been kind of following up to this story to see like, hey, has he deleted this? Has he deleted that? If not, one of the things that happens when you start becoming a journalist is you just you screenshot like a maniac.
Journalists and Facebook trolls both are screenshotting like maniacs.
I can't even. Here it is. It's still here. So this wasn't all in the Cleveland scene thing. It is linked to it. But just for narrowness of condensing words or whatever, there's a lot that got left out. But I'd like to read some choice things here. That these are what I eventually pulled, the threads I pulled on as a journalist. So he opens up with, "Hey, I don't. It's been brought to my attention that some people are lying about this event and me," and so he opens up with that people are claiming that this event was not approved by Miss Rice or the family, and that I am somehow just doing whatever I want to disrespect Tamir and his legacy. And I hope you can tell by this event I'm a very loving, kind person and do not slander my character. And so check your ego, don't make this about you. This is about Tamir Rice. Here we go. If I could put this in bold on in the type on the screen, I would do it. Miss Rice and I speak multiple times a day. She is the first person I have on the phone when I wake up and the last person I attempt to go to sleep at night, which I have been failing at miserably. And then this photo, and attached to it he says, this photo is taken directly from the official Tamir Rice Foundation Facebook page. You can see her personal endorsement, and where down below it says, we stand in solidarity with Brandon as he wants to have this event, but it's not the official event. So he goes on to say the last thing, and this wasn't in the piece, but it did kind of piss me off, but I didn't quote this in the Cleveland Scene one. He says, I don't want to say that the majority of people spreading these lies have been people who consider themselves white allies. Or I do want to say that the majority of people, I do want to say that the majority of people spreading these lies have been people who consider themselves white allies. I don't think I need to begin the conversation about why that is unacceptable, especially during this moment in time. I asked everyone
Nice.
remain humble, blah blah. So if there were white people who were calling him out, he basically like gaslit them into saying like, "How dare you?"
Yeah. It was
So
well. So.
I'm gonna ask you. I'm gonna ask you, Brent. What
Mhm.
if you were like, I'm gonna find out if this is true or not? What's the first thing you could do with, the information I have here?
Yeah, what's the first thing I would say go and check with Tamir Rice's mother.
Yes, that is
The woman
certainly
he apparently talks to the first at the beginning of the day and oftentimes at the end of the day, which seems a bit incredible as a
bold
non-family.
claims.
Yeah.
Bold claims. No,
So
but
so
you're
just
skipping
just
you're skipping over the first thing
uh,
that you could check into with this to even
which
wonder
would be
how, do I
the
do I go do I go to that step if you don't even know Samaria Rice? You have
yeah.
no idea how to get in touch with this person. You are a rando on the internet with suspicions.
I would say go to the foundation's page and check and
And
see if that post is in fact there, and that post is not there, is what you're telling me.
was not there. It was not there. What we get on Brandon that he shared is a screenshot. I will tell you, as a developer, I can inspect any page with Chrome. I can make any page say any fucking thing I want without Photoshop, and I can just screenshot that.
Hmm.
So I don't know that he did that. I can't confirm that. I can just confirm that it is not on the foundation page.
Yeah.
And so where I went from this.
And just to catch people up here, just the bare bones of this, so they understand the full context of what we're talking about. So we have a young black child murdered by cops in a park for playing with a toy gun. We have a activist not associated with the family saying that he is associated with the family and having a rally supposedly in solidarity with the family and within memory of this child in the actual park he was murdered in. And this rally coincides around at the same time as a much more radical Black Lives Matter rally in the neighborhood. And this particular rally seems to be very
It's
feel
across
good.
town. It's across town, but the exact same starting time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and this is a feel-good kind of rally where there's hot dogs and tug of war and T-shirts and a DJ and stuff.
Yep.
Just
Yeah.
sound like something, if you might be
And
a white person uncomfortable with the more radical aspects, you might say to yourself, oh, here's a nice thing that I can go out and feel good for being a part of, and feel like I'm making a positive difference in the world,
yes,
you know.
yes.
Uh,
And
and
that you're
maybe and
getting to
maybe
you're getting to something else that's in this. As I'm sitting here looking at the Facebook event page that's still up, the post right below that. I would love to volunteer if possible. Anything I can do, thank you for doing this. And then, oh, I can bring this. Oh, it looks like you got to help, but I looks like you have enough volunteers, but I'd love to help. So it wasn't just that there were people that attended this thing, and there were also people that were like willing to go the next step to just showing up. Like, I will put my effort into making this happen. So
yeah.
that's another thing that was usurped by this event.
So kind of
And
like the volunteers for Carol Baskin in Tiger King.
it always comes back. We're always like 2 degrees from Tiger King. Is that the world we live in now?
Oh man. So essentially here you checked on their Facebook page, you found that the post that he had is not up there. So then you further chased this, and I think I showed your cards a little early.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, what at this point, I had been just internet sleuthing on. Like I said, there were other reports. People were just like having questions about events that were being done by people who. So I just started digging into Brandon, and I'm looking at him, and it's like I see, he actually, seemed very like activist conscious.
Hmm.
What I could see from his resume on like LinkedIn and his Instagram and some social media. But so I just kind of put it out there to journalists I knew. Well, one initially about another story, and she's really busy and dealing with a family emergency, but she looked it over and seriously enough and said, you've got some good instincts here. You should keep on this. And that's kind of like the
Pull
first
on
time I
that
heard
thread.
it. Yeah, and I kept hearing that sort of encouragement from professionals I was able to get in touch with, and it turns out a lot. And eventually it was Christopher Johnston. He was a former guest on my show. He wrote an excellent book called Shattering Silences. That book is sort of tracks the improvements in dealing with rape and sexual assault survivors in law enforcement, but like getting them to listen to people better about how to deal with that. So he's really wired. He's written like 20,000 stories here in Cleveland. If there's anyone that would be like, okay, could get me, say, who do I talk to get in touch with Samar? That could just, I wasn't trying to get her on the phone even. Or how can I just get a line to her? And
to confirm whether this guy is legit or not.
Yeah. And so he ended up knowing a playwright that named Terrence Spivey, who's a big deal around here, and Terrence was willing.
We're all very key.
Yeah.
People don't realize it.
He's doing fantastic work. I definitely plug Terrence Spivey. He's doing something about the last black man burned to death and burned at the stake in Texas. It's harrowing. But he liaisoned a call. I called him, and then he had Samaria call and dial in, just sort of a proxy, because she has to protect herself like that. And on that call, I was able to get pretty quickly the confirmation that like the short end of the story I got from her that goes into the article is that the first time they had spoke, well, they had some prior contact because it just turned out that his grandparents were the ones who adopted a dog that she had to get rid of for some reason. I don't think
very kind of vague, tenuous connection.
Tenuous. And it was interesting. I don't think it's in the article, but the only time, like later on, the dog got hit by a car, and they never like let her know.
Oh.
So they don't have like an ongoing relationship in that regard either. But then she did, like, a colleague like tried to introduce him to her once at one point. But with regard to this, the first time that they heard about this event, they saw flyers for it and found a GoFundMe that had already raised like $1,200. It's since been taken down. And they contacted him to say, you've got to stop that. And he tried to smooth the waters at that point and say, hey, by the way, if you want to go on MSNBC with me, I have a producer friend. You could go on MSNBC with me. And that's when she was like, you can talk to my lawyers.
Yeah.
Like, why do I want to go? Her quote is like, why would I want to go on MSNBC with you? Who are you?
Yeah. Who is this random guy who seems to be, chasing a little bit of time in the spotlight, using, unfortunately, my son's death.
I cannot speak to his motives. Mm-hmm. I can just say that, like, first uncovering, like, misrepresenting his relationship, and what also, I just sort of set on it as a, like, well, this seems like a story you could at least prove, and then I started to internalize it and get angry about it when she talked about, it's quoted in the piece, but you don't hear the agitation and the anger in her voice, and she's like, that place is supposed to be sacred, and for someone to be throwing a fucking party up there on his birthday, and I just thought about, like, if my son had been murdered by the police and someone just held up his name like that in the place where he died on his birthday and they didn't know his favorite color or his favorite, but it pissed me off. I really felt her pain, and it made me just be, and then I learned that, she was dealing with, there is a local place that just put on a fundraiser in Tamir's name they had no idea about, but the venue didn't know about it, so they called it off. Fake Instagrams had just been popping up about it, and what's funny is while I was buttoning up the story and getting my last confirmations, like the Wednesday before mine got published, the front page of the Plain Dealer was about this happening, but at sort of 1,000 feet. Like, they mentioned Instagrams and things like that, and at first I was like, oh, did I get scooped? But then I realized they had, like, up in the clouds seeing it, or helicopter level, and I was sort of down in the weeds, like, here's one very specific person that did this.
Yeah. And so this kind of relates to an overall pattern, and just so that everybody knows, it's a pattern, but they're not necessarily one related to the other. This could just as easily be a number of different actors as opposed to anything coordinated. But
oh no, yeah, there's. I'm not saying that there's any, like, there are people in other cities that are just suspicious of, like, they have good reason to think that there's people that are, like, play acting organizers who are working with their maybe or current law enforcement.
Yeah.
And and,
And we
and
ran
I,
into.
I'm and just so you know, just go and one thing that got me, I have decided to just be public with, because behind the scenes when I talk to Samaria, when I talk to everybody along the way, and I start just naming it and saying I'm a journalist, and I say this is the kind of journalist I am. I'm a movement journalist. I'm paying attention to movements to the degree I can, with a posture towards taking listening closely to activists, and I don't know, just like I'm vested in it, or I'm not, I'm biased, but I'm looking to be fair. And where that kind of goes, or I can hold up as an example with this, is that there are lies he told in this story too that I uncovered. I wanted to include places he worked on
Mhm.
his LinkedIn, like, and what's fucked up. We can swear. It's my show. It's your show,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We can swear.
So
But
what's fucked up?
yeah,
I gotta check on this. But so yeah, what's fucked up is he said he worked at a place. I thought the place did really good work, and I had this graph, and there was like trying to present this balanced person of or presentation, well, he did this, and because I don't really know why he did it, but then I didn't have to
yeah.
voice
So this
that.
is a legitimate activist organization, which we're not going to
Yeah.
bring up because we
They
don't
don't need their
want.
name attached to
Yeah,
this, but what's frustrating is, so I emailed them to confirm, like, does he have this role with your company? And the owner immediately called me back, and I was sort of put on immediately on, like, my heart raced when she said, he's a friend of mine. I've known him for several years. And so I'm like, oh boy.
yeah,
Because I was just expecting her to reply back yes and ask, and so she asked what it was about, and I told her, and ultimately she was the one like, well, do you have to put our name into this? Because I had no idea he was claiming this about me. We do
yeah.
good work. She knows Samaria Rice, and they try and do the thing the right way and with meaning and permission, and I guess, yeah, not that like every action has to happen with the permission. You can't ever have a
Yeah.
fundraiser, but it really is about like this moment in this place at that time in this park with this person that did it, who's lying about other things, and creating these associations. And I can't say why at this point.
Mhm.
And I worked closely with a writer who's a novelist. She worked with me on the New York election primary, and she's in. So she kept, by the end of this, still, she's just like, I gotta understand this guy as a character. Like I think you would appreciate where she's coming from, Brent. If I'm just
Yeah.
like, here, yeah, look at all this here, and just think about how many there are other things that came up. Like, I can call out, like, he says, he claims that he's was a core member at Teach for America for 6 years and 6 months. This, someone who I spoke to, I asked Teach for America, I never heard back from them, but, one thing, a thread that's just left unpulled is someone told me, like, they have a term limit of 2 years. You can't be a core member for longer than that. So he's
Yeah.
padding that, or he had special dispensation to claim a longer term there, or whatever, re-up. I don't know how Teach for America works yet, but
Yeah. I mean, by the way, how old is this guy?
I would have to guess like late 20s, maybe.
Late 20s. Okay.
I
Because
have
I mean, so if we're looking at this from a character standpoint, assuming,
and let's put all the allegedlys in there.
yeah, this is all alleged. Just
allegedlys abound.
when you first start out trying to do something and you're at the beginning of your career in your early 20s, or maybe you've been doing something for a while, there is that time where you sit down and you're like, I have to write my resume, because it's the whole thing of like, you got to get a job, you got to have a job to get a job.
Yeah.
And how do you get your first job? Well, it's a catch 22, and there's an element of, and I would assume this goes across the board in arts and activism, of fake it till you make it, where you
Right.
put forth that you're doing it so that you can get the experience that you need. But what's very key when you do that is, don't don't just lie about stuff. Don't I would say, don't pad things in a way that is obviously, you can fact check.
Right.
And so, what I hope is that, becomes a learning experience. And, because it sounds like he was activist adjacent. He knew some of the right people here.
Yeah.
And I could really see, if reaching out to, you know, if you go and take the time to make those inroads and make sure that things are okay with the organizations that you write about or that you create uh, you create events for and around are cool with what you're doing, you can really open a lot of doors that way. I mean, my play North to Maine, great example. I wrote the first play ever about the Appalachian Trail, and then I immediately went to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and said, hey, I wrote this play, do you want to do anything with it?
Mhm.
And it took a lot of work to, get them to pay attention to me and to get the legitimacy going. But when you actually do build that, it's so much more powerful than if you, presumably take a shortcut.
Yeah, yeah, and as someone who like, I've just learned and I think he comes from money. I mean, or he has some sort of career that allows him money. He's been to more places in the world in the last 6 months than I have.
Yeah, or he's just running
And
up a huge credit card debt because
yeah, and
he's the money and given up, given up ever owning a house.
there's also what was interesting. So the story when it came out on Friday, and I'd like to talk about the back end of it too, which is the what I wanted the takeaway of the piece was. But I will just say we'll like leave with Brandon's event. So a friend of mine on Facebook private messaged me, and he told me that he went to this and he donated $20 to them.
Oh,
And
jeez.
so I finally got like a first-hand account because I did look at news footage of this, and I'll tell you the other thing. Remind me about the news footage later. But he said the event itself was honestly nice. There was solid discussion, true celebration of Tamir's life, and just a sense of calm and ease. However, I could tell the whole time the main guy was putting on a show for sure. And the friends I went with commented on this as well. The other host was great. She had a lot of great things to say, was respectful to everybody, and actually seemed annoyed with him as well at several points throughout. He would just basically vamp into the microphone at points, talked a lot about himself, and seemed utterly oblivious to how self obsessed he was, presenting
Ouch.
himself to be. He kept repeating things over and over between the different events. There was a talent show, a few speakers, a panel, and he basically spoke between each of these.
You know what? This just sounds like he might have really benefited from going to an open mic. Um, like, and that's not, by the way, for people listening, that's not me being condescending because both Beezy and I came out of the New York open mic scene. Like, open mics are huge and wonderful, and it's
Oh,
a
it's humbling and yeah,
yeah.
it's humbling and it builds you up. You'll see people. I always said, you see people inspire you, and you see people who will like horrify you, or you'll see people who are bore you. But all of those motivate you in different ways. Yeah, we've talked at length about like our affinity for open mics. So I'm not against that he had a talent show. Again, it was like, and so the other thing to just the other reason I wanted to write this, and the next person that I reached out to was I have to go back and figure out exactly who got me in touch with him. It might have been Christopher Johnson again. Was Kareem over at one of the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Cleveland. And yeah, so the reason I reached out to him because I want to pull up what he Kareem Henton, but what he wrote this. It's linked in my piece, and this was a reason why I considered them credible and at least, or I wanted to like make sure that it was called out like, well, so this was an event that was organized that people put their time and attention into, and at the same time, here is like a statement that Black Lives Matter Cleveland called out, which doesn't always apply to, but everything applied to Brandon's, but they've seen instances where protests turn into barbecues with the police, and some have thought it appropriate to kneel with the law enforcement and have remained silent about actual names of recent victims. And I can say from surveying a lot of events in different places, this is like an issue as far as what I say, like some of these, like the events are, they get softened as far as like forgetting whatever. And but the point with Tamir Rice is that lifting it up the way he did in that park, it was tasteless. And I appreciated the approach that Black Lives Matter Cleveland is having. And I when I contacted him, my sense of how they do things was validated by when he talked about their process, and that
Hmm.
there are families of victims that they'll approach about, like, we'd like to hold up their name and go rally in front of the Justice Center or where he was shot or where they were shot, and the family's like, we don't want that. We want to grieve privately,
Yeah.
whatever, like. And they have that's part of their process, and they respect that. And they're just having that. And I would say that was the main thing that I want to see a lot of people who are new and like, I want to show up for something, and there's rallies, and just always, don't be afraid to go up to whoever's got the megaphone or like the center of attention and just say, who do you speak for, to some degree. And or don't take
Don't
the time.
badger them, but yeah.
No, what I would say more than that, like beforehand, just like be looking around and find out who are the people that are connected to victims of police violence in your city, because there's a name in every town, and and then the next level, and that's the one thing that I've gone through activist training, and I've spoken with a lot of activists, and I've been asking myself about these events, and I've directly asked some organizers, and I hope if they're just new, like, because again, some people I think are being suspicious of a group because like they're just
Just because they're new.
enthusiastic, new blood that's like, we're just going to do it, and we're going to figure out how to, have a rally and a march, and that's great. But I really think there's a lot of valuable lessons from trainings I've had politically about campaigning, where what is your minimal and your maximal demands? Like, I would, like, is it getting rid of qualified immunity? Is it disarmament is your maximum, or completely, like, transferring their funds into more community support oriented programs? And when an action doesn't have that, it can feel like a pointless action. I mean, as long as people are coming together, there's always some tacit like positive from that everyone's rubbing elbows and you're meeting people you wouldn't have met and feeling
Yeah.
solidarity. But at the same time, the organizers should have that in mind. Obviously, if you're new to protesting, you don't have your minimum and maximal demands. But in my opinion, I find organizers more credible when they have that, and those
Yeah.
demands are stemming from, like, we're here representing a family, and if this demand had been met, that their son or daughter or cousin or niece would still fucking be alive.
Absolutely. So
That
there's a couple things for maybe the uninitiated that might not understand about this with regard, because some people might say, well, what's wrong with having like a feel good event like this? I mean, obviously,
Sure.
we get so much negative stuff, and it is important also to celebrate life and to
I'll just say it feels good to be to demand things from your government,
that feels good
and
too.
and stand with other people who want change.
Yeah.
So I will feel good in a different way.
Yeah, so there's a thing that happens within capitalist society, and it's called recuperation. And recuperation occurs. A good thing to point to was I was on an episode of HuffPost Live where Urban Outfitters took the famous Che Guevara image and put it on an obscenely expensive T-shirt that was made using, like, I think third world labor and stuff. And we actually brought in the artist who created that image based upon a photograph, and he had forced Urban Outfitters to pull it because they were essentially stealing the image, and he eventually turned over the copyright to Che Guevara's daughter. But the thing is that capitalism has a way of incorporating criticisms of capitalism and of the system that we live in into itself and spitting it back out as something that fills the same niche but is not actually dangerous to the system itself. In much the same way of Che Guevara's image being on a T-shirt at Urban Outfitters. So you will see that happen. Another thing that, like, what was brought up in the segment that I was in was the kufaya, which was a symbol of, radical Palestinian solidarity, which then became just simply a fashion accessory. Again, recuperation. The society takes it, it eats it up, it chews it, and then it spits it back out in a neutered form. And we see this both by accident, essentially just by people maybe meaning well but not being able to follow through, and we also see it like directly. I mean, there were numerous times that we found police infiltrators at Occupy. The most famous one was the guy who infiltrated Occupy as a police informant, then infiltrated a biker gang later on and attacked a family on the West Side Highway. Like broke in the window of their car and everything, because apparently he was a little bit of a nut. Surprise, cops. But when you get involved with these radical movements, there are people looking to disrupt. There are people looking to elevate themselves at the.
There are people. There are people too who are just sent into, like, in Zuccotti. I can't tell you how many times it's felt relevant recently in talking about this, or, and sort of, I've been talking about methods of police subversion of movements or whatever, or standoffs, and, DAPL is one that'll be relevant, obviously, with certain scenarios, but also, like, with Occupy, there was a very just strange story, and I have a whole episode about it, talking with Deb about the night we spent there with Parents for Occupy Wall Street. And what the quick version of it is, like, it was supposed to be like 12 families all set off coordinate area. We're going to sleep there with our kids, wake up in the morning and just show solidarity, and that we trust the park down there and it's good people and that it's safe. This guy, like, wanders up to the big red thing, the statue, the Joie de Vivre, and I was sitting right there. I was, like, laying down, looking up at it, and so I just see him, like, come on moseying by, and then just shimmy his way up it, because it's like girders. It's like, and he can just, like, and he's doing it not fast, but he's moving himself up. And then not long after he's about halfway up to it, where he was a little, like, nest area, two cops come by and they just start being like, hey, you got to get down there. And then the whole night he's just, like, spouting crazy demands about, how they're not crazy, but at the same time it's just like, okay, he's just yelling at the cops, and everybody was down there, and the parents are all really disturbed by it, and the kids are like can't sleep or whatever. But where it all happened is they ended up just buttoning it all up. Where it all went, though, is by the morning they surrounded the damn thing with the stuntman bags for jumping off buildings. They got welding torches and cut off railings right now, and they're like, you got to move your beds because we have to cut off the railings because this guy is 20 feet off the ground. And then they ended up bringing a cherry picker up to him, and he got in it and left. And the story of that night you can still Google, like, man, and he turns out he was Canadian ex-military, and he's mentally disturbed. And that is the story from that night. The only thing that you will probably find about the Parents for Occupy is my fucking podcast. Because I just recorded an oral history the night after, because I said to Deb, like, that was weird. And there's a lot of details in there, but that's as fast as I can be like, I look at that now and be like, why wouldn't they fucking do that? Overreact on purpose.
Well, and there were, there were issues like, I think there was that woman Nan who, seemed to be completely out of her gourd, or working for some conservative organization or something that would just go down.
There were so many pockets of, like, I learned about from, in the course of my investigation, I was actually got to get in touch with a producer from Unicorn Riot. And we never met during Occupy, because I did what I did and he did
ships
what he
passing
did.
in the night.
But he helped manage, like, their websites and the live stream team at Global Rev, and he told me all about, like, oh, we dealt with this grifter. I'd have to go get my notes to get his name. You'd probably know it. Justin Weedy or something like that.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, so I don't know where he shook out, Clout Chaser, Op, whatever, I don't remember, but yeah, it's a thing. Shady organizers. That's like the name of my folder as I
Shady organizers.
Organizers.
I mean, going forward, knowing that there are all these hazards, like my friend at Occupy Wall Street. I don't know if you ever met him, Comrade L. He got asked by the press like what was the worst thing about Occupy Wall Street, and he said crackheads and Democrats. Um, but yeah, they would send drunks in. They would send like the cops would send drunks in. I saw a guy come up to one time at Union Square. I saw like a guy come up to like where the food was, pull out like a ball, break it and shower all of the food in ashes. I saw a guy on N17, like the really big Occupy protest, probably the biggest one that we ever did, with like something like 30 or 50,000 people, trying to talk other people into jumping the rails, which is a crime in New York, and you will go to jail if they see you jump the turnstile in the subway. After the whole group had gone over why it was so important that if we're going to go on the subway, we have to pay for a subway ticket for everybody because of the way that the people cracked down on this. And I confronted him at the time, and I said, like, hey, don't jump over it. He's like, yeah, jump the turnstiles. It'll be great. And I'm like, okay, motherfucker, you jump the turnstiles. And he looked at me and he goes, well, I have a ticket. I'm like, yeah, okay. Later on, at the very first Million Hoodies march, like for Trayvon Martin, I saw that same guy in the crowd, and I watched him pull an egg out of his pocket and throw it into the crowd at other organizers trying to start a fight. So this is a hazard that people really, really have to watch out for. Now,
it sucks though. Like you do have to have like the conversation about like this is a thing, but it also you don't want to poison people with paranoia and and granted, like I had
exactly where we were going.
I had to deal with that paranoia on a real level too, where it's like with and I say this all started from like a Reddit post. Well, I didn't just in a vacuum run off that. I actually reached out and like I am in direct contact with the OPs. And it took a while for them to be like, I had a posture of like, look, I'm an open book. It's kind of good that I'm like, I went viral. One guy said like, I went viral at Occupy Wall Street. I've written for this and New York Election Justice. You can find my name here, here, and here. I have a podcast going back this many episodes. It's like, if I'm working for like the CIA or some org, like they're really good. They've crafted an amazing persona that's fake, and I'm manipulating you, but you should probably just go with it.
I'm going to find out in like 20 years is exactly what you were doing.
I'm an op, man. But the point is, like, I just appreciated that people's skepticism and paranoia, and certainly reporting on someone like this who just so blatantly lied on social media, so like blatantly misrepresented himself on LinkedIn and things like that. It took the natural skepticism you should have of anyone you just know through profile information, social media or anything like that. Like it's like 10 times as high.
I feel like there could be a complete podcast just about, social media and people lying on social media, like for gain and crazy.
Yeah. You could just do a show where you just kind of blindly randomly hop around LinkedIn profiles and then just call the fucking places. Like, does this person work? Has he ever worked there? No? Okay. And just like, okay, and like I found 12 liars today.
Yeah. So
that's a whole other beat, though. Like my whole reason for being on this, though, is like, and I didn't want to just be I had a gotcha story. Like reason why I think it's important, and what we're talking about is this, since this is a persistent problem, is that I want to make sure the most authentic voices are being heard in these movements, and the ones that are trying their best to like demand the highest level and the most immediate change. And what I'm seeing is, and I saw firsthand today at a rally in University Heights, it was organized by like very well-meaning kids who had kind of never done it before, but they're also doing it all over the place. Like they did it in a neighboring city called Beechwood. Like, so they're just kind of like hitting around the area. They are locals though, but when I asked them like, what are your like minimal demands? And they were like, that's a good question.
Yeah.
But it was like the chants were, when they were leading in at certain points, they were really just hammering like yes, it can't just be a hashtag, but then their real takeaway was vote and but also show up to city council and all the things like, and then our mayor spoke, who I've actually had on my podcast, just a sort of a blind like, hey, maybe my mayor will say yes, and he did. He's accepted. But
That's
he
cool.
I pressed him.
Good.
He gave a sort of speech about like it was good. It wasn't complete bullshit, but at the same time it was like, we're better than we were in 2012, and we're better than we were in 2016, and we're going to be better than we were, and he is I think a good guy. But someone started yelling out something like, just going like, we need to talk about the police's budget in this town. And he started engaging with them, and I was like, well, hell, I'm a journalist. I just asked, like, where is that surveillance van from, and how much does that cost? There was a massive surveillance van with, like, the big, like, domey white things, and then a huge tower full of bubble cameras.
Oh, wow.
And there were at least 2 drones that I don't know if they were civilian or whatever. I know the helicopter was pressed.
I still remember the first time I saw a drone at a protest. I literally thought like this is I'm showing my age here, but I literally thought like 'cause people were like, oh, there's a drone, and I'm like, it's a remote controlled airplane, and then I realized, wait, it's not really a big difference.
Drones changed. But he didn't answer. He didn't answer me, and then he finished what he was going to say, and then I followed him back to where he went, and I was like, yeah, but seriously, why is there the big police truck here? And he's like, well, just to make sure everything's safe. And I just kind of got this bullshit answer. And what's an interesting thing about today with journalists?
You're talking about the mayor. That was the mayor's bullshit.
The mayor, yeah. And well, and then I said, is that? And then I've been learning about do you know about regionalization?
No.
So look up that term in relationship to it's something that's actually being pushed by police lobbies and security lobbies. Regionalization, it's where they'll sell it as like, oh, it'll be more efficient and blah, but they'll admit and they're consolidating, basically saying like, and what if we have officers from here and here and here all serving these areas, and then you don't all have your own individual police forces? But it's I asked him like, is that something you share with like, he's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, because I'm kind of keeping that term in my head as I'm looking at police budgets more, and I'm as training myself to go more in, like, if I'm going to like pursue journalism more, I figure it's good training, just like, what can I cover locally? How do I become familiar with reading and understanding my city budget? I mean, ours is like better than some because the police is 30% and the fire department's 30%, and then everything else hovers between like 2 and 8 or below 1. But there's yeah, so
two things that protect property taking up 60% of the budget. Gee, I wonder why under capitalism.
Yeah, but here's the thing. This was clearly, and my mayor's a Democrat, and it's a blue city and in a very diverse, good neighborhood. So it's like it was a very like it was a good gesture, a goodwill gesture that like they blocked off a lot of streets in major areas for a rally of, there was a decent amount of people there. I'll show you the pictures. But then like, yeah, the real takeaway was like vote and civic engagement. And it was not at all, it's definitely softer than some of the things I'm seeing elsewhere.
Yeah.
And less, there was calling out people's names, and there was talking about real statistics, and there was talking about real racists, the real deep history of racism, and that it's 400 years. But it actually wasn't until this woman stepped up and interrupted the whole thing. And she started calling out, and it was loud at the moment. I get the name right. I don't like to say the name when I don't know the name right. But someone I hadn't heard of, and she told his story, and that she used to be an officer, and she also had quit. But she had been, like, passing by, getting food.
And she saw this and felt compelled to say something.
They started talking her down a little bit, and that was one of the only things that I interjected. I wasn't really chanting with anything if I was covering it, even though if I am for it, I was just like, if I'm going to share the audio, I also am there to like hear other things than me screaming. But I did say, I'm like, let her speak, like very loudly, and I went right to her. I'm like, I want to hear she like I kind of used what I could to pull focus, and that's exactly like I would say is like what I would hope to do is like when I hear an authentic voice that wants to talk about their pain and something that needs to be addressed that's being ignored, I want to go hear from that person very closely. Not that these other people aren't well intentioned, but at the same time, they were willing to work with the city. They had the mayors on board to like speak. No one was off. There was no opportunity from anyone in my neighborhood to say like this is how I have someone I know that was harmed by this and shit. Everybody has like damn near
Yeah.
everybody has a story of like from living in New York and being close to adjacent to activism and getting as close as I can while having a family and being a pussy or whatever just
Yeah. I
but
call that being
I'm
smart, but
way, yeah, I don't like using that word honestly, but being way more scared of the police than I ever have been of like activists and stuff like that. But
yeah.
so yeah, this is like the arc I've been on, and it was just sort of I fell into this and was all these journalists. I spent a whole week trying to get someone to like, hey, there's something here you could pull, and they're like, yeah, you're probably right, you should do it,
Yeah. So,
and
so to wrap everything up here, let's say there are people out there who want to get involved safely because COVID is still around, and do not spread that. I will personally come after you if you do. Um, but if someone's looking to get involved, to get in the street, with your experience as a journalist and a movement
I,
journalist,
yeah,
leadership, Occupy, what would your advice be to someone who's coming from a good place and wants to get involved but doesn't really know how? What should they be doing?
well, I'll just say like what I've just realized over the years is discovering it's very similar to how I've embarked my ventures from music or coding is like I suddenly was doing and then I realized oh that's a job or whatever. And with journalism, I just sort of realized, and this didn't even happen from me being in the streets. Today was the first time I was out in the streets, sort of covering things. But what it is just I've been paying attention to things so closely, and then eventually there's just something that I saw that I'm like, oh, maybe I can. I just took it seriously, and there was the diligence to follow up. And what the job is just not being afraid to reach out to people and call them, and like you have to have the credentials for it, but and then writing the story, I'm sitting here. This is my first opportunity to talk about how impassioned I felt about things or just really explain where I'm coming from. The piece was a challenge for me because I had to write in the detached investigatory tone. And the
Hmm.
lesson I learned about reporting versus like opinion writing or what I would do on my Facebook or Twitter
Editorializing.
editorializing, yeah, is that you have to figure out how to let the reader feel what you feel without telling them how to feel that way. So it was having Samari Rice's words and mentioning the tone of her voice and quoting the right words that landed on me. And you kind of take people through your journey, and that's what I found to be. And the biggest thing, is like I wasn't afraid to reach out to people I knew who were writers, like you were in my circle of
Yeah.
like, and one, I know a documentarian around the corner. I happen to have a lot of contacts I was able to suss out, but I don't know, and I don't know how unique that is, but I wasn't afraid to solicit advice, and I like telling one of the first people I told, I said, all right, am I smoking too much weed? And he said, no, you smoke the exact right amount.
Amount of weed. Okay, great. So that was BZ Douglas. BZ, where can people find your work, your podcast?
Yeah. So right now, I mean, Twitter will continue to be like a conduit for me. I'm at BZDUG, kept it simple. And otherwise, I'll be at BZ Douglas, all spelled out Douglas, .substack.com. That's where I will be having a mailing list. And Patreon / Doug. So,
I am a
yeah,
supporter of your Patreon. Everyone else should also be a supporter of your Patreon because the fact of the matter is that we need more citizen journalists as publications have had their budgets cut and pulled. More and more of our news is controlled by massive corporations and
I can
people.
tell you this. I can tell you this. I mean, I know I was doing the learning by doing things, so things took a little bit longer, but you compress all the time I'd spent on this over the course of maybe a week and a half when I
Mhm.
realized it was me. yeah, it's like what, maybe 12, 14 hours, and that's like $75.
So someone go on Patreon and give him 75 bucks. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This was great. I would love to have you back on the podcast and the show.
Sure.
And, next time I get another project ready to go, I'd love it if you would have me on BZ Listening because it's a wonderful podcast. And yeah, anything else you want to say?
No, that's it. Just make sure you're paying attention to who your organizer is, and yes, let's make sure it's not just a hashtag this time.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are watching from my audience or from Bees, please subscribe to my YouTube. We passed 500, and I'm looking to get hopefully to 1,000 subscribers. Sometime hopefully before August. And I have a new debate coming up on Modern Day Debate. This is going to be a four-way debate where I'm going to be arguing against two libertarians
Whoa.
about
Now, American libertarians.
American libertarians.
I've learned about that distinction in last year. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I should plug. I'm gonna have or I don't know when it'll be out, but tomorrow night I am interviewing Kareem Henton, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter Cleveland, to learn about their organization and how sort of the whole thing fits into the larger structure and his background, and yeah, do a deep dive into that.
Great. Well, I will see you later, BZ, and let's talk again soon. I really miss you since you left New York. It's
Yeah, man.
all right. And I guess this is Brent and BZ signing off.
And scene.
Yeah, great.